Hi, everybody. This is S.J. Thomason with Christian-apologist.com, and I have a big question for you. What happened to the new atheists? You recall the atheist people that you see, like here, you'll see it Penn Jillette, Neil Tyson deGrasse, Bill Maher, Lawrence Krauss, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, Dan Dennett, Richard Dawkins, Ricky Gervais, and Ali Hirsi Ali. We see a bunch of new atheists here. And new atheism sort of made its debut around the time of 9/11. So when 9/11 occurred, a lot of people were pretty much anti-Islamic religious radicalism. And that sort of morphed into being just anti-religious altogether. And so four people, what they called the four horses of atheism, stood out and started writing books about atheism and about the joys of atheism. Books like The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins became a bestseller, made him a millionaire. Christopher Hitchens, also quite a witty guy. Well, he also went to debates and things like that, also millionaire. Dan Dennett and Sam Harris also were publishing books. So they became quite wealthy. This is going back to the early 2000s. And so by about 2009, Richard Dawkins had been part of a bus campaign in the United Kingdom where they were writing a story that said there is no God, and basically you didn't need to worry about it. So you can go and do whatever you want to do. And that was sort of the crying motto of the new atheists, this idea of love the one you live with, that sort of thing. And they had a Reason rally around 2012 in the United States. And the Reason rally was another place where a lot of them got up and stood up and became a big voice for atheism. And a lot of people jumped onto that bandwagon. A lot of people became atheists around that time. I want to say hi to Slam RN. Interesting topic. Yeah, I think so too. I think just as you watch this, what's really interesting is how we're going to see this, how this changed. Like the interesting thing that this switched from modernism to postmodernism and what drove the new atheists away. So we're going to get to that because I've got some really cool stuff here. But anyway, so what happened? We go back to say 2011, 2012. You have people like Richard Dawkins getting up there and saying that you need to mock Christians. You need to mock people who believed in faith. In fact, they were kind of scared of mocking Islam. In fact, we see that right now in the United Kingdom where we see some terrible things happening, but we see a lot of people really afraid to stand up to that group. Rather, instead, they feel quite brave against the Christians. And so you had people like Richard Dawkins basically saying that we should openly mock Christians and people who were delusional. And you had other people like Rationality Rules and Cosmic Skeptic and a bunch of other people making big YouTube channels that were talking about the how God was basically a figment of our imagination. And so yeah, the DAM network, DAM, I don't know what that's short for, but says, hello, popping by. Am I one of the new atheists? Well, we'll find out. Are you a new atheist? So these people that I have in this photo were identified years ago as new atheists. And so new atheists were sort of different from the old atheists, and that was sort of cutting edge. They were standing up and telling people to mock Christians. It was sort of against what the traditional atheists were doing. Also, instead of saying that they didn't believe in God or that there was no God, a lot of them said that they just merely had a disbelief in God, and that the burden of proof was on the Christian or on their interlocutor to prove that there is a God. They could look out the window and cite evidence. They don't think there's a God. So anyway, so we have these people. And so let's take a look at what happened a little bit here. So we get to the next, trying to get to the next slide here. Oop. Okay, so we have the deceased. That's unfortunate, but back in 2011, Christopher Hitchens passed away, and he had been very busy at that point. Before that, he was making a lot of waves because he's quite rhetorically gifted. He was very good in speech, and he was able to use a bunch of one-liners and appeal to quite a bit of people. In fact, a lot of people today still refer to the Hitch slap and all kinds of other things, and they admire Christopher Hitchens very much. He has a brother called Peter Hitchens, and Peter wrote a book called The Rage Against God, where he describes Christopher and Christopher's rage against God. And he also describes that the two of them were raised as Christians, going way back when to United Kingdom. And they both rebelled, and they both decided that they didn't want the constraints of religion and the constraints of an authority. And so they became atheists. Then what happened is Christopher stayed an atheist and he wrote books, like I mentioned, and he became quite famous. And his brother also is pretty famous in his own right. His name's Peter Hitchens. He's a conservative commentator over in the United Kingdom. And Peter, what happened to him was he was an atheist for a while. And then one day he saw this beautiful painting in Europe. And the painting had something to do with the afterlife. I forget exactly if it was Dante's Inferno or what it was, but it was a painting that really struck a chord with him. And he just realized at some point that there is a higher power, there is God. And he came back to Christianity, thank God. Daniel Dennett, I know the least about him, but I do know that he passed away last year, and he also was an active New Atheist, and so he's one of them. So the deceased is one group. So the first four horsemen of New Atheism, two of them have passed away. Then there was this interesting person, Penn Jillette. Now, Penn Jillette is a magician. He's out of Las Vegas. He, interestingly, way back in 2009, he said that if a Christian who believes in the afterlife did not proselytize to him, he would be insulted because he felt like if we actually believe in an afterlife, then we should be teaching it to our friends who don't because they're running a big risk. And so that's an issue. So I want to say hi to Damn Network again. He says, I host the daily atheist morning show on the internet. I'm Chris Mallard. Okay, well, welcome here, Chris. I haven't seen you before. I'll have to, little shout out to you. Shout out to Otangelo, whose book I need to read. He sent me a copy of his book, and I definitely am going to read it so I can interview Otangelo very soon on my show. And a shout out to Susan, Slam RN. She's also a great Christian friend of mine. I've known her for a while now. So anyway, Penn Jillette he said that. It was very interesting that he said that. And it reminded me of Putty on Seinfeld. I don't know if you ever saw the episode with Putty and the fish with Elaine. Putty was the boyfriend of Elaine on Seinfeld, and Elaine was mad at him because he believed he was a Christian and he believed in Christianity. And she was mad because she said, how are you not trying to teach me if you believe that? And he's like, you know where you're going. So it's a very funny show. But anyway, I digress. So Penn Jillette, here's what he said recently. So I found this little quote from him. It was in a place called cracked.com. And he says, I don't think I've seriously entertained there being a God. Yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom in the Torah, and use that, and also use Kurt Vonnegut and Joni Mitchell. And that was in 2024. So I would call him the apathetic. Sadly, there's a lot of believers who are, and non-believers, I should say, both camps, who are rather apathetic, which is a real shame. So that's one crew. Then we got the next group. I would call Bill Maher the anti-Catholic. Now, Bill Maher, as I understand, was a Catholic at one point in his life, raised a Catholic, I believe. And he is, I would call, an anti-Catholic. He's a comedian. He has a show. In April 12th of 2024, he said that pro-life Americans think that abortion is, quote, murder, and it kind of is. I'm just okay with that. I am. And he followed that up by saying, there are 8 billion people in the world. I'm sorry, we won't miss you. That's my position on that. Well, that seems a little cold. As you probably know, in the United States, we've lost over 60 million babies since 1973 with the Roe versus Wade decision. December 1st, 2023, he said, Christmas is fun if you accept that it's just pretend. And then in November 10th, 2023, again on his show Real Time with Bill Maher, he said Catholic schools are completely based on bullshit. So it's a shame. It's a shame, but that's where Bill Maher stands. So let's get to the next. Whoops. Then I would call Sam Harris the deranged, because sadly, Sam Harris, I would say, is a prisoner of Trump derangement syndrome, to the point where here's what he said about Hunter Biden. Quote, Hunter Biden literally could have had corpses of children in his basement. I would not have cared. In other words, he would do anything he could, lie as much as you want to. Do not let Trump get in office. I mean, this man went totally on the bandwagon of full derangement syndrome. You usually don't see that with people, but that's the extreme. Okay, so we have that sort of thing going on. And then we get to the next idea, and this is where the rubber meets the road. This is the kind of the crux of the conversation here, and what I think has happened with New Atheism. So as we recall, way back when, you have a number of people, as we mentioned before, people like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Dan Dennett, and who is the fourth one? I'm forgetting already. Dan Dennett. And anyway, so we have these new atheists, and They were modernists, meaning that they believed in traditional biology. They believed a man is a man and a woman is a woman. They believed in a lot of things like that. In fact, you have Richard Dawkins was a zoologist, so he's pretty familiar with science and that kind of topic. But they began to clash probably around the 2015, 2016 with what you call the postmodernists. Now, modernists believe in exalting science over religion and what they call rationality and reason over tradition and traditional beliefs. That's the modernist idea that came about in academia not too long ago, within the last couple hundred years. But then there was this movement over the last 100 years or so to postmodernism, and that's what crept into the atheist movement. Postmodernists don't think there is any sort of objective truth, and they think that really everything is a social construct. And they think that if America and the world can just agree on certain things, like we ought to be nice to our neighbors and we ought not to just go out there and thieve from each other or shoot each other or rape each other, do anything awful like that. If we can come to that agreement, then we'll live in a very nice society. However, as you know, societies don't always come to that agreement. We've had some horrific societies, and postmodernism always fails. That didn't stop postmodernists like Matt Dillahunty of the Atheist Experience, the drunken peasants guy. I forgot his name, but the drunken peasants guy, I'll just call him. Didn't stop him. Genetically modified skeptic and more. There's a whole bunch of them out there now who formed a sort of a unification against people like Richard Dawkins, who's now the bad guy. Richard Dawkins, white male. A lot of times the white males, unfortunately, if you're a heterosexual white male with no claims to any sort of disparaged group or any sort of discriminated against group, then you might be discriminated against. And that's sort of what we saw with some of the postmodernists. So Matt Dillahunty is also a white male, so is Drew, but they have sided with the trans movement. So they've sided with that whole thing. And that was where the big cut came between Richard Dawkins and these others. So many of them, Rationality Rules, many of them have made a lot of videos about affirming the belief system of the group I've just mentioned. And that is where the big split came between the atheists and the current atheists and what they called the new atheists. So the past new atheists. Postmodernists were also the ones who separated what we used to call synonyms, gender and sex. I used to use those words very interchangeably in my classes all the time. I taught about Title VII of the Civil Rights Act and discrimination against sex, and I use gender easily as a synonym. You can't anymore because some people claim that that's a social construct and you can desire a particular sex, and it doesn't matter what you're born with, it matters what you claim. And so that was where we had some disagreements between the new atheists and the current group of atheists. Also, some have denied that human life begins at conception, despite the fact that 96% of biologists in a study of thousands of biologists agree that human life does begin at conception, because they want to have the right to destroy that human life, sadly. And so we see that sort of thing. Some claim that human value is not intrinsic, conferred by God, but rather it's conferred by other humans. You can see the danger with that. If you think that humanity and the value of humanity is conferred by other humans, who's going to say that when you become old and inconvenient, your family can't just take you out? You're not valuable anymore to the family. Maybe you are sort of suffering from dementia, and that's not of value to your family. Or you're born, you have some sort of an issue going on in the womb, and they just figure, you're not of value. We're not going to name this one. Postmodernists also believe there's no objective truth or morality. They don't have anything to ground their beliefs, so they ground it in what you call utilitarianism, meaning that if you're trying to figure out if an action is good or bad, you look at the idea of what utility it has. Does it cause a greater good for the greater number of people? What's the consequence of the action? And then you determine if the action's good. So if you have a decision that's to be made where either one person's going to have to die or 10 people are going to have to die, the consequentialist will say, well, I'm going to take the one where just the one person dies because that's the lesser of the two evils. And so consequentialism can get kind of ugly. And that's an issue. And deontological ethics is the idea that we have a moral duty to do what's right. And if you're a deontological Christian, you believe that God has conferred that moral value. So, yeah, I would say postmodernism always claims. Kip Davis says, I need a citation for this claim. Well, I don't think so. I think we can go out there and just see everywhere where it's failed. It hasn't succeeded anywhere. It's trying. But right now we're watching its failure, unfortunately. And actually we're seeing what happened here that I'm about to show you with Ayaan Hirsi Ali. So let's see what first happened. This is a little postmodern rebellion against Richard Dawkins. And here's what happened to Richard Dawkins. Now, as you know, I think he's out of the United Kingdom. He wrote The God Delusion. He's a biologist, zoologist, and he was the 1996 Humanist of the Year, according to the American Humanist Association. But that was taken away. Here's what they said. Regrettably, Richard Dawkins has over the past several years accumulated a history of making statements that use the guise of scientific discourse to demean marginalized groups, an approach antithetical to humanist values. His latest statement implies that the identities of transgender individuals are fraudulent, while almost simultaneously attacking Black identity as one that could be assumed when convenient. His subsequent attempts at clarification are inadequate and convey neither sensitivity nor sincerity. At the end of the statement, they concluded that Dawkins is no longer deserving of being honored by the AHA and has voted to withdraw, effective immediately, the 1996 Humanist of the Year award. Now, this comes straight from Newsweek, from an article sort of recently that I obtained. And then we get to the last person. Now, this is really the fascinating part, and this is where I want to dive in right now, because I think that this whole idea of Ayaan Hirsi Ali has been fascinating to a lot of people. And so here we go. So yes, I have a PhD in business administration. That's true. You didn't say that part. My focus is on business administration. Within my field, we focus on a lot of things like international management, human resource management, leadership ethics, and other things, ethical frameworks are right up my wheelhouse. And I don't study postmodernism or modernism. However, I have read quite a bit on modernism and postmodernism, enough to know that postmodernism is a very flawed concept. And it's flawed because it's not steeped in what we know of humanity, basic understanding of humans. And it's the fact that you can't socially construct your sex, period. And you can't just create the word gender, redefine the word gender, and suddenly think that you can use that as a social construction to be unable to claim exactly what a man is or what a woman is. It's a challenge. It's a real challenge that we have right now with people who claim otherwise. So here we go. Let's take a look at what Ayaan Hirsi Ali had to say. So you might like this. Okay, so here's Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and she here is at this event called Morality Without God with Adam Carolla, Ross Douthat, and Michael Shermer. Here we go.
Yeah, so I think both things are true. I became a Christian because I believe that Christianity is true, but I think the proposition that it is, I wouldn't want to use the word utilitarian, but Christian morality is superior to any other kind of morality I've seen. I lived as a Muslim and I lived as an atheist, and I settled on Christianity. And I settled on Christianity because it fulfills a personal spiritual need. I confess I did have a God-shaped hole, and it's gone now. It's filled. So that is the personal story aside. Now, atheism has always existed because it's always been, a perception of the world, of nature, the naturalists, people just, the people who don't perceive of God, don't need a God figure, aren't spiritual. We didn't call them atheists. We probably call them naturalists. We had other labels for them, but they always existed. But for this particular discussion, I always want to separate the atheists that I found in the West, nice, wonderful, warm, friendly people, but they
some of them, I'm sure, are good people.
Yeah. But they are Christian atheists. You know, everything that Adam said, I just wanted to say, but that's all Christianity. You just set aside, and you grew up with it. And so there's that. There are atheists like Adam and Michael. And then there are hardcore atheists. For instance, the communist atheists. And if you ask yourself the question, is there any society that has adopted atheism as its governing creed? And where can we find them? And I think of places like North Korea. I think of Cuba. I think of the former Soviet Union. I think of China. And I know that the two atheists here on the stage and the atheists that I used to be are very different. But I think what most Westerners forget is that they are products of a Western Christian moral system.
So we're like, you're saying that Adam and Michael are sort of enjoying the fumes of Christianity, even if they can't acknowledge it.
They are non-practicing Christians, yes.
I believe they're non-practicing Jews, but I don't know.
And Jews.
Yeah, Ross, go
Does
ahead.
Michael want to?
I think that's, I just wanted to comment on that. I included that little clip because I find that this is all fascinating. In case you haven't heard, there's a person called Apostate Prophet. He's been going by Apostate Prophet for a while. He was also raised a Muslim, and he initially was an apostate prophet. He was an atheist for years, I think 10 years is from what I said. And he decided to convert to Christianity recently. In fact, I think he's now part of the Orthodox Church. He's going through that whole process as a catechumen. So I think that's wonderful. And I want to say hats off to AP for that. Everybody loves to see a great conversion like that and a person come back into the fold. And so the fact that Ayaan Hirsi Ali, her initial steps into Christianity was when she looked around Western society and she saw the values that are a big part of our society that we take for granted. Tom Holland talked a lot about this in the book of Dominion, but we take a lot of the values in society for granted. We wonder where we get this idea that humans have intrinsic value and human rights. Where did that come from? That's steeped out of the Bible. Essentially, we said neither slave nor Jew nor Greek nor Roman, whatever it is, we're all one in the eyes of God. We're all of value. In our Constitution here in the United States, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, okay, under the eyes of God. We're given certain rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is all part of our Constitution, really important here in the United States. And so it's something that you want to thank God for, that also these Christian values have been instilled here in the United States. And so I also wanted to point out some of the other things about our country that's a little different. Now, in the United States, we have property values, and you can't just go seize people's property merely because the government decided that they're going to reclaim those assets. We see that what happened in Venezuela, for example, under Hugo Chavez. He declared socialism. He called it socialism. His version was really a type of communism. And he went around seizing a lot of the property of all kinds of businesses down there that had to do with major sources of transportation and oil and gas and all kinds of other really important industries. And then he and his cronies drove those industries into the ground. And now well over 90% of people in Venezuela are impoverished thanks to those practices. So what Ayaan was pointing out as far as the communist atheist is quite true. There's two types of atheists: the ones who are enjoying the merits of living in a Western society and Christian belief system that's infused throughout, and the others who unfortunately have been part of some of these communist societies who have no morals. People like Khrushchev and Lenin and Stalin and some other Trotsky and all those horrible people of the past, Mao Zedong, who destroyed quite a bit of people. So, yeah, so I wanted to say, and I could open this up. I'm not sure if I should do that. I see some people in the chat. I've got Kip Davis in the chat. Welcome, Kip. Good to see you doing it the hard way again. And so we have, where do we have here? I've also had Susan in the chat a little while ago. Trying to get my I got to get a new computer. This computer's so pathetic. Okay. So, and Slam RN, welcome, doing it the hard way again. So if we've, I've never said nobody has ever had their property seized. One of those things about, as you know, Kip, being an academic, you don't make statements quite like that. because somebody could easily disprove you. There might be one case of somebody who had property seized. Maybe this person was thrown in prison and we found that they had illegally taken the property in the first place. I mean, certainly there's some cases of that, but in general, in the United States, you can buy a house and you can trust that the government's not just going to come run down your house and take over. You can buy a business. You can start a business really easily here in the United States. I've done it before. Super easy to do. And that's one of the benefits. So, all right, I'm going to open this up. Here we go. Let me just see where I have my share link. Where in the world did it go? Invite. Okay. All right. So if you guys, anybody wants to come in here and chat about this, let me just open it up. Which I'll do sometimes. Here we go. Okay. So, yeah, so the bottom line is, and one of the other things I think that happened to New Atheism sort of happened to my brother, because I have a brother who's an agnostic, and he's over in Germany, and my brother was basically pointing out that, wait, I think I've got Ortangelo here. My brother was pointing out that Jordan Peterson has been such a huge influence on this whole thing. So, Ortangelo, how are you?
Yes, hello, SJ. I'm fine, thanks. And you?
Trying to stop the screen. There we go. Doing well. Yeah, it's Lent right now, so we're in the going into the second week of Lent. So that's been nice. We got a little time before Easter to kind of remember the value of Jesus and all that kind of good stuff.
Nice, yeah.
Yeah. So we also got Sig here in the chat. So So tell me about, what are your thoughts on New Atheism? Do you think it's surviving? There's pretty much gone, and now there's a new atheism, or what do you think?
Well, I think atheism has never been a thing. It has always been bankrupt. And it doesn't matter if you label it as new atheism, a strong atheism, weak atheism, whatever brand that you choose, it has never been actually something which really withstands scrutiny. Of course, I mean, uneducated people, they think they have a case, and they think that they are superior in their views compared to Christianity in special, but maybe also other brands of theism. But once you start actually to question what they actually have, then the card house usually falls apart very, very rapidly, very fast. And then what you get is someone which confesses, well, I am an agnostic, and I think it's very honest to be an agnostic and to confess that we don't know yet.
Yeah, it's interesting with my brother, because my brother's a few years younger than I am. He's, I think, exactly about 4 years younger than I am. And it's interesting because he said not too long ago, I think it was about a year or two ago, he said, if you pinned me down, I would admit that there is a God. Like he said, if I pinned him down, but he just doesn't want to go out there. Like he doesn't want to go out and say it. He doesn't want to live his life accordingly. He just, so that's where he is right now. So unfortunately for him, he gets to be in my prayers. Every time I go to church, I say prayers for him. So sorry, brother. I won't name him now, but it's like what I do.
Yeah, maybe the second thought is always, well, if I change my worldview, then that brings a lot of baggage with it, and then I'll have to change my life and what I'm accustomed to do. And there are things which God looks over my shoulders, and if I have to think about that, well, I'm quite comfortable with my life style and with my pet sins, and why should I change?
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. That's and I found a really good meme on Twitter, actually, with a picture of at first, like you're with a sin. It's like the sin is like a cute little cat. And at first you're petting the cute little cat, like, oh, welcome. The next thing you know, the cat turns into this massive lion that's eating you. It's like,
yeah.
I think that's a good way.
I mean, it has a lot to do with your emotions. And if you make such a decision, it is really connected to your feelings and your emotions and what you actually want for your life. So it's not strictly and only a rational decision.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I see right here, so you have Kip Davis. Kip is a Dead Sea Scroll expert, and he He says it would have no difference on how he lived his life. So that's the thing. It's like, if you believed in God, would it make a difference in your life? And I think, I mean, I don't know if you know Jordan Peterson very well, but I think one of the reasons why Jordan's been not wanting to convert necessarily is because he keeps saying something like, how would you live your life if you knew that to be the truth? Like, suddenly you'd feel like you've got a lot of work to do to live up to what you need to live up to.
Yeah, I think changing a worldview, especially when you are aware about what it entails, isn't an easy thing to do. Unless, of course, that God really draws you and you surrender, and that you actually have no big choices to make than just to accept and surrender to God's grace when He reveals how much He loves you. And I think many times people have really to come to that point where they just break down and see there is no escape. And I think actually even I forgot her name from Eritrea or Ethiopia. Ethiopia, I think. What is her name?
Oh, Ali Hirsi Ali. I mean,
Yeah,
I
yes,
Ali.
right. Hirsi Ali. So I mean, she has an amazing intellect, and she said that she was basically living as everything was okay when she was an atheist, but she really went through depression because she understood that atheism has nothing to offer, you know, and
Yeah, and
yeah.
I think it's the idea of hope. Like my husband always said that. He's kind of like, where's your hope?
Absolutely. I mean, what does actually atheism offer you? And if you look, the 99% of the atheist streams, what they basically do is they are bitching about Christian faith and the Bible and genocide in the Old Testament and why they don't like the God of the Bible and why he is such a monster and so forth. But you rarely see them promoting the naturalistic atheistic worldview because it doesn't have anything to offer.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. It's actually kind of sad. Like, if I lived like that, there's the nice thing. I mean, actually, going back to kind of what you said about God loving everybody, like God loves His children, God loves everybody, and so I firmly believe that. And I think even when, like, I look back, I keep reflecting on this thing in the Bible, but when you have Jesus's apostles and they're all like, Peter kept saying, "Oh, I love you, Lord. I would never betray you," anything like that. And Jesus is like, "Before the cock crows 3 times, you're going to betray me." And he did. And then you have Judas, who slinks off and does betray Jesus. But at the end, it turns out that Peter comes back. Peter loves Jesus and he goes off and lives. And Judas didn't think that he thought his sin was bigger than Jesus' mercy. But Jesus could have easily forgiven him if he would have just given him you know what I mean? Like, it's so
Yeah.
sad because people think that their sins are bigger than Jesus' mercy, and they're just not.
And I mean, the guy which introduced me to the evangelical faith, you know, SJ, that I was first a Catholic and I became an evangelical. And he told me that when he was in the process of conversion, he had the thought that once he converts, it will be like to go into a monastery where you cannot do anything anymore. And that kind of scared him because, I mean, it's not very attractive to think that once you convert, all what life can offer you, which are good things, you cannot do them anymore. And I think there are so many prejudices of unbelievers what it actually means to live a Christian life. And I mean, you know that, and I know that we are not perfect. We fall often, but we can stand up and still come to the Lord and ask for forgiveness. And He is graceful, and He goes with us through everything. And the more that we actually understand how big His love is, the more we also will align with His will. But that's not something which comes by just, how can I say, as an obligation, but really because you know it is right. So it comes from your desires actually to do what is aligned with the Lord's will.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I forget the guy's name. I want to say it was Clayton Christensen, but he was a pretty famous professor up at Harvard. And he basically said, he's kind of like, at your death, Jesus is going to ask you a couple of questions like, how did you treat your neighbor? And you're going to have sort of this, a flashback of your life, and you'll see all the times when you treated them well, or maybe all those times when you didn't. And so that's, as a Christian, and that to me is the challenge. Like, you realize, okay, when I go out tomorrow, any chance encounter, like if I'm rude to somebody, rude to a person who's serving me at a restaurant or something like that, that is going to be remembered. That's not going to be forgotten, because this is one of Jesus's too.
Well, I mean, the first and the second command is connected to love, and Christianity, the core of it is love, and of course, it's not about how much money we have made, how wealthy we have become, how powerful, or I mean, the usual things that the world makes us believe that are relevant. It is really about love, and once someone understands that, then Christianity becomes really the only choice, and there is no other religion which comes even close in regards of the principles that Christ has brought to us.
Yeah, and I think that's such a true point, because a lot of it is people forget and they think, oh, Christianity is just sort of like I thought it when I was growing up. I took it for granted and I didn't think it was that special. And you take for granted in the West the fact that we say things like the meek shall inherit the world, and we feel like this compulsion to help people who, most of us I should say, want to help the poor and help the needy and the helpless and the people who are suffering in society. That's what Jesus called us to do. And it's interesting because when you go back to the Roman Empire, as reported by Tom Holland, he said that everyone was exalting, and before that too, everyone was thinking that if you're rich and you're wealthy and you're healthy, that God's blessed you, and if you're poor and you're blind or something like that, God's cursed you. But it was just the opposite. A lot of times, if you're suffering, that was actually a blessing from God, strangely enough. And so Jesus said the meek will inherit the world. And so that's huge. I mean, that's changing around the human psyche in a way. We weren't thinking like that. So Christianity's really instilled some good values.
Well, the thing is that if Christianity and Christ and the principles that has been brought to us would be a human invention, and here in Brazil there are a lot of atheists claiming that it was a Roman invention, that Jesus was invented by a Roman, which is completely absurd. But
it is.
I mean, the thing is that the principles that Christ has brought to us, they are against our human nature. They are not favoring what we as normal humans want. So this is something which really shows us that the message which comes through the gospel, it is from above. It isn't something that someone could have invented.
And even like to build on what you're saying, it's coming from above, from a source of love. Because a lot of times you have people like I just featured right there with Neil deGrasse Tyson. He thinks we're part of like he said, it's a 50-50 chance we're part of a simulation. And he thinks it's kind of like what Stephen King had with that Under the Dome thing, where there's like these evil people outside the world who are like, messing around with us. And so instead of, he understands that there could be a source of power outside, but he's attributed it to a malignant power.
Well, the Bible says that there are malignant powers, but of course they are not the predominant and ultimate force. The ultimate force is God, which is good. And so in the end, good will win. And for us, of course, this is something which brings us peace and hope that in the end, good will prevail, which is something which naturalism cannot offer, because after you die, there is nothing.
Yeah, let me ask you this. So, see, you said Brazil, and I know you're from Brazil, and I think you came out of Europe originally, but in Brazil, what are the trends? Like right now, I looked up the trends in the United States. For Pew Research basically said about 65% of Americans are Christian. Most of them are evangelical Christians, and I think it's 40-something%, maybe 43% are evangelicals, and I think it's 2% Mormon and 20% Catholic, something like that. There's also 19%. I got to double check the percentages. But anyway, so we have the most that we have here is evangelical Christian. But the atheists, I think it's about 9% are either atheist or agnostic here in the United States. So what does it look like down in Brazil?
Well, evangelical Christianity has grown a lot in the last 50 years, but in special with the prosperity gospel, with the Pentecost churches. It has grown to maybe 25-30%, and I'd say maybe 60-70% are Catholics, and then there is a small percentage of other religions. But I think Brazil is still one of the biggest Catholic countries in the world.
Yeah, Brazil definitely is I mean, I think a lot of South America, like you're mentioning, Central and South America is definitely a lot of Catholics down there. And Catholicism is the largest, as you know, religion in the world. But I think United States, our founding fathers, a lot of people in the United States were Protestant coming into. So we've got a huge Protestant group here in the United States.
Yes.
So is there also, some people have said that, say they have the new atheists and they turn away from new atheism, and there's been a growing surge in things like witchcraft and paganism and Wiccan and all that kind of stuff. Have you seen any of that, the occult, any of that kind of stuff down in Brazil?
Yes, there are many people which practice witchcraft. I mean, this is not something new. This is something actually kind traditional. The Afro rooted religions like coming from with the slaves from Africa, and they brought with them their religious practices like macumba and so forth. Then there is also a huge number of people which practice spiritism with Allan Kardec, and there are also Satanists openly worshipping Satan. So there are also, like in the United States, there are some groups which openly worship Satan, or there are atheists, Satanists. So this is also happening here in Brazil. So there are also these groups.
Yeah, and that is, the more I study about that, the sadder it is, because from what the Satanists do, and my understanding is they always do the inverse of what Christians do. So, for example, Jesus died on the cross at 3:00 in the afternoon is the estimate, that he died around 3:00 in the afternoon on that Friday afternoon in April. I estimate it was April 3rd of 33, but he died. And at 3:00, they say, like a lot of people who study the occult and that kind of stuff, they say a lot of the most demonic activity occurs around 3 a.m. So it's like the inverse. At 12 hours later, there's demonic activity. And if you're affiliated with the occult, you're more likely to have that kind of activity, unfortunately. And that's where they say, like, people think they're taken away by Martians or whatever. They're what is it, aliens? They think that space aliens took them away or something, when I think maybe there's some sort of demonic activity possibly in some of those cases. So I don't. It's scary. And they wear the upside down cross, and they try to steal communion hosts from the Catholic Church and use those in their disgusting black services and black weddings, and everything they do is the opposite of what Christianity says to do.
Yeah. And there are also a lot of people who believe in extraterrestrials. Not only here in Brazil, I think in the United States too.
Oh yeah.
We see a persistent holding up of these claims, and also in the mass media, on Daily Mail, and then they come up also with the FBI, which supposedly holds secret files of this. And I mean, there is clearly a spirit of deception working here to make that many do not come to Christ.
Oh yeah, sad. And here's somebody saying this, Jeffrey. I want to say welcome to everybody who's in here: Jeffrey, Jeremy, Susan, all these great people. Jeffrey says Protestants of America were all Freemasons with an oath to do something other than the God of the Catholics. Now, I didn't want to get into the Protestant Catholic distinction as much there as I do the Freemason thing. Are you familiar with Freemasons in Brazil? Have you heard of that group of people?
Well, here in Brazil, it is very strong. Actually, my state where I live, it is one of the strongest strongholds of Freemasons, and they are all over. In all cities, there are Freemasons, and we know the source of this, and I keep myself very distant of it.
Very smart. Yeah, we do. And they have, like, I've studied it a little bit. There's degrees Like when you first start, it seems like you're in there with just an old boys club and about a normal people who are good businessmen in the area and that sort of thing. And you think you're getting in on a good group, and they consistently make you do all of these things till you get to, I believe it's either the 31st or the 33rd degree, where you're basically completely in alignment with Satan. So it's
Yeah,
horrible.
yeah. The
So
33rd degree is basically where they reveal that the great architect is actually Lucifer. So that's when they really, when it becomes very clear to them and they know what they're doing.
So would you say that you believe in what G.K. Chesterton said about atheists? He said, if you don't believe in God, you'll believe in just about anything. And so do you think that's possible? What he
I
said?
think that once you reject the God of the Bible, then you'll just make up your alternative worldview, which can be basically anything. And yeah, I believe that. I believe that nobody can live happily without values in this life, without a sense of ultimate understanding of what the meaning is of all of that. I mean, it can be some very naive constructs, and it can also be very, very elaborate. But I think we all kind of have a sphere of faith that we work with, that we try to be happy with it, and to make something out of it which makes us feeling happy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. And so I want to say hi also to Captive Desk, and I think I said Jeffrey Malachi. And so that's, I mean, that's the challenge I think you see today is we try to figure out how to bridge the divide between atheists and Christians. And if you do believe, like, do you believe, I don't know if your beliefs are, do you believe that there is a heaven and a hell? Or do you believe that there's more of a universal idea where no matter how you end up here on the earth, everyone's going to end up in heaven? Do you believe? I'm not
No,
sure
I
what your
don't
beliefs are.
believe that. I am very conservative, orthodox in my beliefs. I really believe that the Bible is God's revealed word, even if it's not perfect, even if there are supposed contradictions, which I think are there because God decided to use fallible humans to write his book and his revelation. But I think that if we are looking at the grand scheme, then it is true. And it makes sense because it is an integrated book which has a start, middle, and an end. It starts with God creating the universe and life and planet Earth and everything that lives. It continues with the fall, with the redemption through Christ, and with eternity. And if heaven and hell were not true, then the entire Bible, we could take it and just throw it out because it wouldn't make any sense. And it wouldn't make any sense for Christ becoming human and paying such a high price for us if there was no punishment and justice for sins. So, and what is the price of sins? It's death. It's very clear in the Bible. So, the Bible either is true or it's false, but there is no middle ground.
Yeah, I agree with you. That, and C.S. Lewis said something kind of similar to that, where it's either this or that. You got to make your choice. There's no wishy-washy in the middle. And that's the reason why I'm asking that, is because there's a lot of people here in the chat who don't believe in God, and maybe you've taken a pretty strong stance as far as being either an atheist or agnostic, and maybe you just don't care. You're not even looking into it. But the scary thing is, if you do believe that there is an afterlife, you don't want to end up in the place where it's completely devoid of God, is I guess what I'd say. Some people say, oh no, I actually would want to be there. I don't want this, peering eye watching what I'm doing all the time. And if God's not there, I'll be happy. I can do whatever I want. But I just think the existence there is pretty scary, as far as from what I've read from a ton of like saints who've had these books, who've had these insights. It's not where you want to end up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even Christ, he was very clear. He said that hell is a place of torture, of torment, and it's not fun. So all these caricatures that it will be where all the nice guys are and there will be parties and sex and fun and rock and roll, that is just ridiculous. The Bible is very serious about that. And if it wasn't serious, then Christ wouldn't have suffered what he actually did suffer and went through. And I mean, I think we all should take what the Bible says very, very seriously.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can't agree with you more. And I think that's the reason why lately I've decided they're the person I've been trying to read up as much as I can are two saints, St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, just looking at what their writings were, because I think they had some pretty deep insights into things with a lot of stuff. And just like Thomas has some insights into angels and demons and all that kind of spiritual battle going on in our midst. And I know it's interesting because in the last few hundred years, the world's kind of gravitated to the idea of naturalism. And we talked about this, modernism, postmodernism, and all those kind of things. But it wasn't up until about a few hundred years ago that people denied there's an existence of a greater force out there. There's a lot of people in our Western society that deny spirits, and some believe spirits, but they don't believe God. So it's crazy.
Yeah, like here in Brazil, those which are believing in spirits, which in the reincarnation and all this kind of stuff. So what we see around us, that there are so many false beliefs out there, and of course the truth is, the quest is which is the true one, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, for me, it is very clear it isn't naturalism. Naturalism doesn't have good answers to the big questions of origin. It really doesn't have. And when someone really makes the effort to dig in to these questions, which is the topic of the book which I did send you in regards of the theistic worldview, and if someone really starts to actually question the big issues of how our universe and life is made, like the universe requires the laws of physics, it requires fine-tuning, it requires a beginning. Life depends of codes, of information, of language, of molecular machines, and we are conscious. How do you explain all that? Science doesn't have an explanation for the origin of the universe, life, and consciousness. And if you really start to think about it, then and think about the alternative, that there wouldn't be any mechanism at all to bring that up, how does that make sense? And this is really something which atheists, rather than to start continuing to poke holes in theistic faith, they should actually start to focus on what they actually believe positively, and if the naturalistic non-God worldview makes any sense. And I always cite Louis Pasteur because I think he's so much straight to the point. A little bit science can even draw you a little bit far away. But the more you study actually this natural world, the more it draws you to God. And that's so true.
Amen. Yeah, amen. I had somebody in the chat saying there was a story of Muslim women who were crushed under some rubble and stuff like that. And I want to say the thing that we can trust in Jesus and in the Lord is he's the maximal level of justice and the maximal level of mercy. And so if there are people in these different belief systems who he knows their hearts, he knows where they are, and they could very well end up in heaven, put it that way, because Jesus is the maximal source, and he knows people's hearts, and he'll make sure that things are fair in the end. And that's just who he is, right? Would you say that's fair?
Absolutely. And I think it's wonderful that he gives us enough light for those who want to find God. He gives us enough darkness for those which want to live autonomously to him. So I think those which criticized how God has made up everything, I think there is simply no need to make this kind of criticism. I think God has created the best possible world. There are questions which we don't have answers, like the problem of evil, what happened in the Old Testament. But hey, nobody in no worldview has answers to all the questions, and that's perfectly fine. That we also do not have all answers to the difficult questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I want to say hi also to Alexis. I hadn't said that here, so got some good comments here. So yeah, I think that's the thing we have to. I mean, looking at that, I also want to go back to even what you said, like we were talking about hell, and it's really interesting because people from the Muslim faith, one of the things that they believe is when they die, if you're male, you're going to end up with all of these virgins up in heaven. And apparently they're virgins at first, but not after you meet them. It's like thinking about that kind of setup. The setup is not at all carnal for the Christian belief of heaven. It's not a carnal situation. You're not even married anymore to your spouse. You're basically up there like an angel and in a non-carnal situation. And so I find it one of the reasons that I would say poking holes in that other faith or other faiths that are like that is because they're strange beliefs about the afterlife that I don't think align with reality.
Oh, I often speak with Muslims, and it's impressive how they are literally brainwashed into a holy book which makes simply no sense. And they say, and when I ask them, well, how do you know that the Quran is true? Well, there are no logical contradictions. It is one book which has not changed, and so forth. So we know it's true. I mean, I'm sorry, but a
Yeah.
moon that splits in half and other kind of stories that we are made by semen from the spine and uh, I mean, sorry, but it really doesn't make any sense.
One of the videos that I have on my I captured this little piece from Apostate Prophet. It's only like a 1-minute clip that I got from a modern day debate. What he said in this debate, it was so funny because he basically said that Muhammad was getting some slack because he had married the daughter, because he had an adopted son. He married his it was his daughter, and he got a little bit of pushback from that. And he goes, "Oh, wait, I'm having a revelation." So it's like the way you phrase that. And suddenly, Allah told him he could marry the daughter. And it's just, I mean, some of that stuff, if you look at that with an objective eye, I know sometimes people say, well, are you looking at all faiths with an objective eye? I think if you do, and you realize, I think what Nabil Qureshi said, he said he was Nabil was a Muslim and he was seeking God, seeking Allah, and he found Jesus. And he looked at the lifestyle of Muhammad versus the lifestyle of Jesus. And that actually brought him to Christianity.
Yeah, and it is interesting that even the Quran portrays and admits that Jesus was born by a virgin, by Mary, that he made all these miracles and so forth, and that he rose people from the dead. But if you compare with Muhammad, which they claim is a higher and superior prophet to Jesus, he didn't all these things. While Jesus was pure, Muhammad here he needed to have forgiveness of sins by Allah. So how do you explain that? The highest prophet didn't have all these things which Jesus had?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Makes no sense. It makes no sense.
No, it doesn't. It's sad. Actually, it's very sad. And yeah, I think there's 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. And so if I think David Wood and others are doing a great work on that front, trying to open up people's eyes in that part of the world, that part of the landscape, because I think it's huge. It's going to be a growing issue that we have, especially with birth rates that are so low in the West and higher in that population. And so I would encourage people, if you live in the West, we're in a society, we're all dying these society as far as birth rates. So please go out and start having babies. That's what I say.
But it's not only that problem. It's also that through all these economical problems in all that Islamic belt, they come to Europe, they come to England, and I mean in England, it's such a huge problem. There are neighborhoods where a Christian cannot go there without having to be fearful, because it's dominated by aggressive Muslims. So, but this is also politics which has been permitted to occur, and also by the decline of Christianity in Europe. I mean, I lived 25 years in Switzerland, and after I converted, about for 7 years, every weekend I went to the street to evangelize, and I've seen how cold people are in Europe towards the faith. And it's really a fraction, maybe a percent or a percent and a half, that really live Christianity and that love the Lord and follow him, and the big majority, they don't care.
You reminded me of something. When I was a Baptist, one of the things that happened a lot was they were doing a lot of missions over in Africa, And I would look at a map and I'd see, well, geez, people in most of these countries in Africa, something like 96 to 98% of them believe in God. And I thought to myself, now, why aren't you doing missions over in Europe? Because that's where you've got a very small percentage, relatively speaking, of people who believe in God. That's where they need the work. But the thing is I think they went to places where they figured people's minds and ears and eyes would be open to listening, versus maybe in Europe, you go there. I mean, I'm of European heritage myself, so I'm very sympathetic towards Europeans. But you go there and maybe people's minds and ears and eyes, they don't want to hear that. They don't mind that their churches are getting converted into gymnasiums and libraries and everything else.
It's honestly very frustrating, SJ, when we actually contemplate the spiritual situation in Europe. I mean, I go almost every year to Italy because my mother has died 2 years ago, and I go still every year to see my dad. And I always pass in Rome, and there I visit an evangelical church, and also my native place I've done so. And the churches, they are so small. It's just a handful of people in the most cases. And also many of these churches, they are so traditional, and it's just not attractive for so many people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is also a reason why there is so little demand for the gospel. And yeah, it is saddening to think about this. I mean, I have the privilege, SJ, to do all my apologetics investigations, and when someone starts to do that, that person understands how enriching that everything is. Also doing science based on our faith. It's so wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it gives us so much, and people, they don't simply not realize that.
It is. I mean, I have to say, since I feel like I'm a better person because I'm constantly working on being a better person. I think that's the thing about Christianity is once you do open the doors to Jesus, he's going to figure out ways to make you a saint. I mean, that's the goal. He wants all of us to be a saint, and he wants all of us to treat each other as well as we could possibly treat each other. And I think I look back on my 2016 self or my 2008 self, and I do see progress. Maybe it's slow progress, but I definitely see that I'm working. It's like a work in progress. But I think that's the beauty of Christianity. But I want to say, kind of touching on what you said, when I do look at the study, there's a World Values Surveys. It's been going on since 1981 out of the University of Michigan. And the lead author, he passed away recently, but his name's Ron Engelhardt. And he studied the difference between, he looked at all over societies, but he looked at what he called post-materialism, not postmodernism, but post-materialism and materialism, and the idea that people were moving towards what he called reason, rationality, and secularism versus going from tradition and religion, and the societies where you see that most prevalent. And it was Northern, Western Europe, Australia, Canada, places like that. You see tremendous levels of secularism. And then, of course, Russia, China, all the places that are like communist, formerly communist and atheists and those kind of places as far as secularism. And Southern Europe is one of the ones that was a little more Christian. Like they've kind of stuck at a little, like you said, Italy wasn't ideal, but it's even probably better than maybe Norway if you weren't there versus Italy.
I mean, Italy really, you see more small evangelical churches growing in Italy, but it is a very slow process. And I mean, since I don't live there, I cannot say too much. I can only say what I have presenced there, and I'd say it is not encouraging.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it gives the door to I mean, I almost think that sometimes you have to see the world we're going to get a wake-up call. Unfortunately, I said this on Twitter and people were offended. And of course, people get offended with a lot of times whatever I say on Twitter, but I said something like the weather. I mean, in the Bible, there were lots and lots of weather events, and God allowed, or even started some of these weather events in the Bible. And I look at the United States, and we're just getting heaped abuse. I mean, we've got fires all over California. We've got massive floods you've never seen before in the Carolinas. Tampa, where I live, got absolutely annihilated in this 2 hurricanes in a row within 2 weeks. That a lot of my friends, their houses were 4 feet under, 4 feet up in water. Tons and tons of flooding, tons of massive damage. Something like I've never seen before in hurricanes. And I know that when people say, well, you're looking at weather events and you're only going back, say, 100 years, and the Earth could be 4.5 or whatever it is how old the Earth is, 4.5 billion, whether it's that or another amount of years. But still, we've seen some serious weather events. And I almost wonder, sometimes people who are priests pointed out that sometimes the places where there needs to be maybe some work done, like maybe in the United States, we've got places where people aren't doing the best things. We're getting heaped abuse, and so I don't know if you've noticed. I don't know if Brazil's getting hit by a lot of unusual, I would say, weather occurrences in the past 10 years.
Yeah.
But what would you say?
Well, in the south of Brazil, I don't know if you have followed that, there was a huge weather catastrophe with inundations of Porto Alegre, and they will require decades to restore. I mean, there are entire cities which have been simply destroyed by the water, and that is something which never has happened in this proportion in the past. And I think if someone is claiming that the climate change isn't a thing, I think they should start to rethink it, because we see the problem of this very clearly. So
Yeah,
it's
and
not
I don't know if, see, I guess my point is, I think we all witness climate change and climate volatility. I guess the question I'm asking is, I wouldn't naturally say it's human caused in every situation. I think that there could also be a spiritual backing on some of the climate events that we've seen. Like it's,
Jesus was prophesying that at his second coming there would be more natural catastrophes, and I think this is what we are clearly seeing too. So maybe it is a conjunction of several factors which are in play here.
Yeah, I agree. So, well, listen, we've talked for a little while there. I was thinking, and now I got to read your book. Do you want to tell everybody about your book before we close out here? I want to read it so I can have you back on and have a nice interview about that.
Yeah, so I use traditional apologetics and classical apologetics, and my method is the cumulative argument for the God of the Bible, which starts with the basic question: does God exist or does he not exist? So this book is basically about this essential question: where does the scientific evidence lead to? Does it lead to a God world or to a no God world? So that's what I am focusing on, and on the 3 big questions: the origin of the universe, the origin of life, and the origin of consciousness, which are the big 3 scientific enigmas, and there are exposed the odds to have a life-permitting universe, what the fine-tuned parameters are, and how fine-tuned it is. Also, the odds to have the first life form, a minimal life form. It is a smaller book than the trilogy which I wrote last year, which, if you know James Tour, he interviewed me about 3 weeks ago. So, yeah. And in this book about the theistic worldview, it is a little bit shorter in regards of the odds to have life from non-life by naturalistic means. And then the big issue of consciousness, which is also an unpenetrable barrier.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny because, you look at just a real simple explanation of the idea of consciousness is you look at Frosty the Snowman. First, he's a snowman, and all of a sudden, woohoo! It's kind of like the same thing when you look at how life is evolving here in the world, and suddenly there's a consciousness. It's like, where did that come from? It's very strange when you think about it.
Yes, I've investigated and wrote some good articles to show that matter and atoms that operate based on the laws of physics, they cannot evolve to suddenly become conscious and then understanding the laws of logic. It is simply an unpenetrable barrier. These are two realms. Qualia and the mind is a realm, and matter and physics is a different one. So it cannot, and this is by Chalmers, he said that's the big problem of consciousness, which science cannot solve. But SJ, my wife is on the door. I have to open
Oh, okay.
the door here.
Well, it's
But,
great seeing you.
Yeah, great talking to you. Thank you for having me.
Thank
And
you.
let me know what you think about my book, and I'm always happy to be with you and share thoughts and ideas.
Will do. I will definitely start looking at it. I'm on spring break right now, so I will start looking at it tomorrow for sure. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Have a
Alex,
good one. Yeah.
thank you. You too.
Yeah.
Alexis Carroll, it's just sad what happened with Red Pill Religion and its creator, Max Dean. I know the Red Pill Religion. I've been on their channel before, and I haven't been in, I thought they sort of disappeared back in 2016. I haven't even heard from a guy, he used to call himself Max Kolbe, and it's Dean Esme, and I don't know what happened to them. So if you know, that makes you unique, because I don't know what happened to them. So, and then we see what we have here with human evolution. The point is that using the word slavery depends on the definition as the terms. You know, it's so funny. My little son was listening to Charlie. I was walking by and he's listening to a YouTube channel with Charlie Kirk on it, arguing with somebody about slavery and Ebed and how it was also called servant and that kind of thing. So I just found that was interesting. My son picking up on some of the same stuff that I do. So anyway, I want to say thank you, everybody, for coming in today. If you would like to come on my channel sometime, just let me know. Leave a comment for sure. I appreciate the comments. And if you like this kind of content, please like and subscribe and do come again. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. I try to do stuff every weekend. I'm at least either Saturday or Sunday each week. And I run a broadcast usually in the afternoons, Eastern Daylight Time. But I for sure sometimes also do stuff during the week, especially if I'm on spring break, as I am right now. In the summer, I'll be offering a lot more during the week and the weekends because I'll have a little bit more time. But so that's that. So just remember, have a great day and do what you do. God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, for whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. Thank you. Bye-bye.